Good evening, I'm Jim Hooker. Welcome to NJN's Campaign 2009 Republican Gubernatorial Debate. For the next hour, we'll be hearing from the two main candidates running in the Republican primary for governor. They are former U.S. Attorney Chris Christie and former Bogota Mayor Steve Lonegan. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Thank you. The candidates will be asked questions by a panel of reporters. They are NJN News senior political correspondent Michael Aron, Cynthia Burton of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Bob Ingle of Gannett, New Jersey. And we will also get to some questions submitted via email by you, the viewers. But first, we'll begin with opening statements of 1 minute each from the candidates. The order has been predetermined. We begin with Mr. Christie, who has 1 minute. Mr. Christie.
Jim, thank you, and thank you to the panel and the sponsors of tonight's debate. You know, New Jersey is in awful shape. In fact, I believe we're at a tipping point. We are, in essence, on the verge of bankruptcy. We saw only this week that Governor Corzine is contemplating a $2 billion bridge loan just to get us through the next 50 days. Why is this happening to New Jersey? It's because of the failed policies of John Corzine, Jim McGreevey, and the Democrats over the last 7 years. These folks spend too much, they borrow too much, and they expect all of us to pick up the tab at the end. What do we need to do to put our state back on the right track? First and foremost, we have to aggressively cut spending. Secondly, we have to cut the business tax to keep good jobs here in New Jersey. Third, we need to cut income taxes across the board for all New Jerseyans. Send me to Trenton and I'll do the same thing I did as a U.S. Attorney. I'll finish the job for the people of New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. Mr. Lonegan.
My fellow Republicans, we find ourselves at a time to choose. We can either rebuild our Republican Party on a conservative foundation and start by ending the immorality and discrimination of a progressive tax code that has empowered Trenton's central planners to redistribute your wealth from those according to their ability to pay to those according to their need, and in doing so, enlarge the greatest entitlement programs in the nation. And we can take on the most activist state Supreme Court in America and put an end to some of the most left-wing liberal social engineering schemes our country's ever seen, like COA and Abbott school funding. Or we can be the Me Too Republican Party, who takes the same failed Republican politics of the past, the same failed Democrat policies of the past, tweaks them and changes them a little bit, maybe wraps them in a different color paper, and delivers them with a nod and a wink to the union bosses and entrenched bureaucrats, and delivers them to our society as if it was some sort of a gift. We must do much better than that. And tonight I intend to convince you that I am the candidate that has the leadership and the vision for the future of the Republican Party.
Thank you, Mr. Lonegan. We're going to move now to questions from our panel of reporters. But first, a note on our format tonight. The candidate who is asked a question will have 1 minute to answer. His opponent will be given 30 seconds to respond. The candidate to whom the question was originally asked will then be given a 30-second rebuttal. The reporter who asked the question has the option for a follow-up question to either candidate. That candidate will then have 30 seconds to respond to that question. Now, as moderator, and in fairness to both candidates, I will strictly enforce the time limits. Michael Aron has the first question, and it goes to Mr. Christie. Michael?
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Christie, as you pointed out in your opening, the state is in a severe fiscal emergency, yet you've been critical of John Corzine for cutting back on homestead rebates in his budget plan for next year. If you're governor next year, would your budget plan seek to increase rebates, and if so, how would you pay for it?
Well, Michael, first, I think what we need to get down to the bottom of is why we're in this fiscal crisis to begin with. State spending has increased 50% in the last 7 years. That's more than twice the rate of inflation. And John Corzine, on his watch, he increased spending 20% in his first 2 years before we had a significant national economic crisis that has finally at least let him keep spending somewhat flat. So our first problem is where we've been. Where we've been is down the path that John Corzine and Jim McGreevey and the Democrats have led us, which is out of control spending on wasteful programs. One of those programs that is not wasteful is giving some property tax relief to the people of the state of New Jersey who have the highest property taxes in America. The average property tax is now over $7,000 a year. So the fact of the matter is this: we will keep property tax rebates in the Christie administration because It is the only meaningful property tax relief that is given right now to the voters, and then we will slash spending to get our state budget under control.
And that is time. Thank you, Mr. Christie. Mr. Lonegan, your 30-second response.
The property tax rebate program is a scam. It's a scam on the property taxes of New Jersey, and it's a scam on the next generation, because it's those rebate checks that have driven up our state's debt from $11 to $40 billion over the last 15 years. As governor of the state of New Jersey, I will do away with this rebate program and provide real property tax relief by giving mayors and councils the tools they need to cut spending and lower taxes for everyone.
Mr. Christie, do you have a rebuttal?
I do. Our debt has not gone from $11 billion to $40 billion because of the property tax rebate program. Our debt has gone from $11 billion to $40 billion because of Democratic schemes from people like Jim McGreevey and John Corzine, raising debt in the Transportation Trust Fund, raising debt on the tobacco settlement, and then securitizing that and having more debt. The debt we have is not because our property tax repayers are getting some relief. The debt we have is because of irresponsible, reckless spending by John Corzine, Jim McGreevey, and the Democrats. I'll end that as governor.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. Our next question comes from Cynthia Burton of the Inquirer. Cynthia?
Mr. Lonegan, you have said that you would cut government spending by 20%, but that really doesn't tell us what would be cut. Can you tell us exactly what you'd cut? Will you close parks and prisons? Will you stop funding courts?
Yes, Cynthia. There are currently 16 departments of the state. I would eliminate 5 of them: the Department of Community Affairs, the Department of the Public Advocate. I would eliminate the Department of Labor and Workforce Development. I would combine health and senior services with human services, and I would downsize, prioritize the DEP to a much smaller department. I would also cut a number of state jobs and a number of much smaller line items as well.
Mr. Christie, a response?
Yes, we talked about this. There's a number of things that we need to do. Yeah, there's some things we have to eliminate. The public advocate is one of the things that we would absolutely need to eliminate, but we need to do much more than that. I say we should go to zero-based budgeting. Every year, built into this budget, is the assumption by Trenton bureaucrats that they should get an increase every year. That shouldn't be. We should start at zero every year and prioritize our spending. And doing it that way, we are going to be able to slash spending using the line item veto and going after it very, very aggressively. That's what we need to do in the state of New Jersey, is to go after this spending aggressively.
Time. Rebuttal, Mr. Lonegan, 30 seconds.
Well, the line item veto is fine, but you have to have a desire to cut actual jobs, like I did when I was the mayor of Bogota. That means downsizing the workforce by at least 15,000 jobs, putting an end to the practice of borrowing without voter approval, line item programs like, for example, we have an affirmative action program in every one of the state's departments. We should have one affirmative action program, if that many. And there's a lot of other areas we can cut spending as well.
And Cynthia Burton has a follow-up. Cynthia.
For Mr. Lonegan, beyond saying that you would do things very differently from predecessor governors, how are you going to raise revenue in the state of New Jersey?
Raise revenue, Cynthia, means raising taxes, and I pledge to the people of New Jersey I will not increase taxes, I will be cutting taxes. I will be eliminating the state's progressive and destructive income tax and replacing it with a simple 2.9% flat tax will make us competitive with all surrounding states. I will end completely the state's corporate and small business taxes that are a drag on our small business and companies and job producers in this state. And I will distribute the state's income tax equally on a per-student basis through every town and city in the state of New Jersey, which means about a 20% tax cut on average.
And that is time, Mr. Lonegan. Thank you. The next question goes to Bob Ingle of Gannett Newspaper Group for Mr. Christie. Bob?
We know a lot about your tenure as U.S. Attorney, but we don't know so much about your elective office as a Morris County freeholder. Could you give us 2 or 3 things that you accomplished in that job?
Yes, I could, Bob. Thank you for asking. You know, when I came in as a Morris County freeholder, I ran on a platform that said we needed to make government more open and transparent. And the first thing I did at the first meeting as Morris County freeholder was to make a motion, which was seconded, to be able to cut the health benefits for any part-time workers, including freeholders. Also to reduce our salaries by 25%. I got an ethics code passed for the first time in Morris County, and after I was elected director, we saw over the 3 years that I was a freeholder a 6.5% drop in taxes in Morris County. So what we did was we managed our county responsibly. We cut taxes, we put in an ethics code, and we put in a provision for bidding of all contracts, including professional contracts, had to have requests for proposal. This was never done before. Over 3 years, I was able to get those things accomplished, and I'm proud of the record that I have as a Morris County freeholder. I think we were able to do some good things in the 3 years that I was there.
Mr. Lonegan, a 30-second response.
I'm surprised with that record, Chris. You weren't reelected after one term. As the mayor of Bogota, I had the best record in the state of New Jersey of any mayor in the state over 12 years, actually cutting taxes and keeping debt stable for 12 years in a row. We outsourced, we prioritized, we did some pretty innovative things like outsourcing bookkeeping in the tax department and garbage collection. I could talk about this all night long, but it's the things I'll implement when I'm governor.
What Steve doesn't understand is the reason I wasn't renominated is because I fought the status quo. When you start to say that all contracts are going to be bid, the party bosses do not like that, and they did not like that in Morris County. So I understand that Steve didn't really follow it all that closely, but the fact of the matter is I was not renominated because I fought the status quo the same way I did as U.S. Attorney and the same way I will do as governor. If anybody wonders what's going to happen when I get in the governor's chair in Trenton, watch what I did for the last 7 years as U.S. Attorney and for my 3 years as freeholder.
The next question is from Michael Aron, and it goes to Mr. Lonegan. Michael.
Mr. Lonegan, 5 states now have legalized gay marriage. You and Chris Christie are both against it. Would you support putting a question on the ballot this fall, letting the voters make the decision?
I'd rather obviously see it on the ballot than voted on by the legislature. Yes, I absolutely would, but I want to make absolutely clear too that I would campaign against the ballot question.
Mr. Christie.
I've made my position on this very, very clear. I think that marriage has to be between one man and one woman, and that we should keep it that way in the state of New Jersey. And the fact of the matter is that you need a governor who's going to stand up, and if any bill comes from the legislature, it should be vetoed that would legalize gay marriage. But lastly, I do agree with Steve. If it's going to be decided, it should be decided by the voters, and that's one thing he and I would campaign against together, is that constitutional amendment to legalize same-sex marriage.
Mr. Lonegan, 30-second rebuttal.
I have nothing to rebut.
Michael's good. Cynthia, Burton has a question, and this round it goes to Mr. Christie. Cynthia?
Mr. Christie, your opponent and Democrats have sharply criticized you for giving out monitoring agreements to people you knew while you were New Jersey's U.S. Attorney. They included your old boss, John Ashcroft, New York's David Kelly, who oversaw an investigation that included your brother but found no fault with his behavior. Can you explain why you gave those contracts to Ashcroft and Kelly, please?
Sure, Cynthia. First, let's talk about what we accomplished in those cases. What we accomplished in those cases was that doctors were being bribed by the manufacturers of artificial hips and knees, one of the largest growing medical device industries in the world. 94% of the market was bribing doctors to use their particular artificial hips and knees without regard to whether that was the best device for the patient. And we put a stop to it. What we did was we prosecuted those companies and we entered into agreements with them to change their behavior across the board. To end the bribes, we returned $500 million to the Medicare Trust Fund. And what we did was we put monitors in charge of those companies for 18 months to make sure that they complied with the law of the land and the new rules that govern the way they conducted themselves. It was enormously successful, and the folks I picked, John Ashcroft, David Kelly, Deborah Yang, David Sampson, and Jack Carley, are experienced prosecutors who did the job the right way, and that's why after 18 months, the job is done and the bribery is ended.
Mr. Christie. Thank you. Mr. Lonegan, do you have a response? 30 seconds.
The offering of these contracts, these no-bid contracts, by the way, that Chris apparently campaigned against as freeholder, which led to him not being reelected, the offering and giving of these contracts is at the least suspect and at the worst dangerous. And John Corzine is going to use millions and millions of his money to explain to the voters of New Jersey that perhaps at the least Mr. Christie's judgment in this area has been questionable.
Mr. Christie, 30-second rebuttal.
Sure. What the voters need to understand is that not one dime of taxpayer money was paid to Mr. Ashcroft, Mr. Kelly, or any of the other monitors. What I also required in my tough prosecution agreement was to make sure that the criminal corporations who committed these crimes against the taxpayers of the United States and against patients who were not given necessarily the best medical care, they're the ones who paid for the monitoring of them changing their behavior. Not one dime of taxpayer money was spent on it. It was all money from those criminal corporations. I think that's the way to do it.
Time, and Cynthia Burton has a follow-up. Cynthia.
Mr. Christie, a state gives out billions of dollars in contracts. Can you tell us how transparent you would be as governor in awarding those contracts, and also whether you would discard the system of just pushing aside open bidding and awarding contracts without going through the process?
Well, we're going to change what John Corzine and Jim McGreevey have been doing over the last 7 years. You saw a recent news report that said that in the state attorney general's office, the place where we're supposed to be enforcing ethics and having the most transparency, 90% of their contracts went without bidding. They asked for waivers on 90% of them. That would end in a Christie administration. We need to have transparency in government. I put forward a whole proposal on that in terms of letting people have access to the budgets and other things over the internet. We would end that practice by the state attorney general's office and other places in state government.
Thank you. And the next question comes from Bob Ingle for Mr. Lonegan. Bob?
There seems to be some sort of disagreement nationally about who represents and who speaks for the Republican Party, so I'd like to have your opinion. Does Rush Limbaugh speak for you or your supporters?
I think Rush Limbaugh speaks for quite a few people, but who really speaks for the Republican Party are the grassroots, the people on the ground who get out and vote every day and are going to make the decision in this primary. The Republican Party is at a significant crossroads, Bob. They've lost their identity. We've fallen behind on the issue, been unable to put forth a bold vision for the future of New Jersey and the future for America. And we intend to start making that change right here in New Jersey right now by making New Jersey a guiding light and a beacon for the Republican Party from Alaska to Hawaii to Texas for being the conservative party it should be to govern the state effectively.
Mr. Christie.
Bob, the leadership of the Republican Party has to come, as Steve said, from the people, but there also has to be leaders that do that. I'm putting forward a set of conservative, common sense principles that brings us back to our roots as a party when we were most successful and when we were leading this entire nation. That's why I've advocated for cutting income taxes across the board, just like Ronald Reagan did when he was president, urged on by the late Congressman Jack Kemp. We need to get back to being a party that cuts spending, cuts taxes, and empowers people to grow private sector jobs.
Mr. Christie, thank you. Mr. Lonegan, 30-second rebuttal.
Chris, you've opposed my flat tax, the immorality and the discrimination of progressive tax that is a wealth redistribution formula run by central planners and trend. I don't understand how you can call it conservative, whether you tweak it a little bit around the edges. Wealth redistribution is income redistribution. When it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. It is not a conservative principle to call for income redistribution and simply change it a little bit and put it into the hands of different bureaucrats.
Bob Ingle has a follow-up. Bob?
I really didn't hear an answer to my question about Rush Limbaugh, but let me move on to something related. If Mr. Christie wins the primary, will you support him in November?
Oh, I certainly will.
Thank you. Now we turn to Michael Aron. And Michael, your question is for Mr. Christie this go-round.
The question's about school vouchers. Steve Lonegan says if a district is failing its students, it should be obligated to give a voucher worth the statewide average per pupil in school aid that would enable a child to attend any school within that district. And if I understand him correctly, he means private, parochial, or public. What's your position?
Well, first, Michael, I want to get back to responding to something Steve said. It's not a conservative principle to be raising taxes, income taxes, on 70% of New Jerseyans and 75% of senior citizens in the middle of an economic recession. And so you may think it's a conservative principle to do that, Steve. We just have an honest disagreement. Now, on vouchers, this is what I believe. The Abbott experiment has failed. And the thing that it's failed the most are those students who are trapped in those school districts without hope of getting the right education. So I not only believe in charter schools and competition, but I also believe in vouchers, Michael, and I don't believe it should just be inside the same district. I believe they should be able to take that voucher and go outside the school district if they want, as long as the receiving public district wants to take them. It's the option of the receiving public district to do that or to go to a private or a parochial school. We have seen the Abbott experiment fail. And the people we're failing are those children. I will stop that in the Christie administration.
Mr. Lonegan, a 30-second response.
Yeah, my conservative flat tax cuts marginal rates for singles making $35,000 from 3.5 to 2.9, from couples making $70,000 from 6.35 or 5.5 to 2.9. I don't know how you think that's an increase for 70% of New Jerseyans. A school voucher must be used to drive competition within a school district, within a community. We do not want to suck all the students out of a school district and leave an empty hulk of an education system behind. And school vouchers drive economic growth in those communities as well.
Time. Mr. Christie, 30-second rebuttal.
So let me understand what Steve wants to do here. He's content to leave children in a district that's failing and allow them to fail and become second-class citizens. I believe every student in this state, no matter where they live, should have the opportunity to go to the best possible school they can, and if the school in their district is failing them, then they should be allowed to leave that school. The school is failing them. The kids are not failing the school. And lastly, on couples who make $80,000 a year combined, Steve's tax plan will raise their taxes by 40%.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. And Michael Aron has a follow-up. Michael.
Mr. Lonegan, Mr. Christie just said we should let students use a voucher outside the district. Why not?
Because what will happen, Michael, is you'll siphon all the students out of a school system or out of a community. And one of the things a school voucher does is drive economic growth by reopening closed schools within a town or city, bringing liveliness back to a neighborhood, bringing competition within that school district, keeping the money within that community. This is a real voucher system that would create real growth and also end any possible animosity behind, say a student leaves a school system and goes to another one that doesn't have vouchers and they're paying and other students aren't.
All right, the next question is from Cynthia Burton, and it goes to Mr. Lonegan. Cynthia, thank you.
Mr. Lonegan, I think both of you anticipated this question moments ago. If you imposed a flat tax, how many people would be paying more taxes? How many people would be paying less? And who would actually benefit?
The entire economy benefits, Cynthia. See, right now we are one of the 3 top outward-bound migration states in the country, and people leaving for Pennsylvania, New York, and Florida. Pennsylvania has a flat rate of 3.07. New York a bottom rate of 4%. Our rates are driving people to those states. You need to only go to the State House at 4 o'clock and see where most of your state employees are going. By adopting a 2.9% simple flat tax, we become immediately competitive with Pennsylvania, New York, and in 3 years when my rate declines to 2.1, even Delaware. And a flat tax will bring real economic growth to New Jersey by ending the outward-bound migration of our friends and neighbors and bringing job producers back to this state.
Mr. Christie, a 30-second response.
Listen, an independent review from a former state treasurer has come to the following conclusion. Steve Lonegan's tax plan will raise income taxes on 70% of New Jerseyans and 75% of our senior citizens. That 75% of senior citizens who will have increased taxes are also going to lose their property tax rebate under Steve Lonegan in the middle of an economic recession. That's why Steve Forbes, the largest advocate of the flat tax nationally, is supporting me and my campaign because he says that Steve is raising taxes when in fact we should be cutting taxes.
Thank you. Mr. Lonegan, rebuttal.
Steve Forbes also endorsed the bailout. You know, my flat tax will drive down the cost of government, bring job producers back into this state, and in addition to the flat tax, I will end the small business and corporate taxes, and that will make New Jersey a magnet state for new business and new jobs. And by the way, I will distribute the state's income tax equally on a per pupil basis. That means a 20% property tax cut for every senior and non-senior who owns a home in the state of New Jersey, Chris, and you haven't addressed that issue.
Cynthia has a follow-up. Cynthia.
Mr. Lonegan, would the flat tax actually replace other taxes?
The flat tax would replace the income tax, and we would eliminate the small business and corporate taxes that are hurting our businesses. Not tweak them, not change them, get rid of them altogether. And we also be taking that income tax, and again, Cynthia, be distributing it equally on a per student basis. That's a big increase to funding for suburban school districts. As of now, over 60% of the state's income tax money, ladies and gentlemen, goes to 20% or so of the students. That's an unfair system. That's an income redistribution scheme, just like the progressive income tax
Thank you, Mr. Lonegan. Next question comes from Bob Ingle, and it's directed to Mr. Christie.
There's a lot of criticism of the Council on Affordable Housing. But what I'd like from you is your opinion on the underlying principle that state government should guarantee access to affordable housing.
Bob, I disagree with the principle. State government shouldn't be guaranteeing access to affordable housing. And we should not be having Trenton bureaucrats in the role of planning where housing should be built, how much of it should be built, how much it will cost, and how much of a fee they'll place on developers in order to do it. That's not a conservative plan. That's not even a common sense plan. It's simply wrong. And that's why you see mayors, both Republicans and Democrats, rebelling against COA. That's why you see nothing happening in terms of economic growth in the state of New Jersey, because the fact of the matter is this: COA is the biggest Trenton power grab we've ever seen. It's John Corzine's dream to expand the power of Trenton. It is simply wrong. And that's why you see people across the state of New Jersey absolutely up in arms about this. It will destroy our environment. It will raise property taxes, and it will not accomplish what the governor even dreams it would accomplish. It's wrong, and I would gut it if I became governor.
Mr. Lonegan, a 30-second response.
The role of government is to provide justice and equal protection under the law, provide an opportunity to earn that home or have a place to live. But certainly for those truly in need, we provide a safety net. I have been opposing COA now for a number of years. I was out advocating against it when no one else was, and I'm curious to watch Chris move his position from being in favor of COA in December to gutting it and bringing it back in a different form 2 weeks ago, and to now apparently call for eliminating it altogether. So I'm not really clear what Mr. Christie's position is today.
Mr. Christie, a rebuttal.
One of the hallmarks of Steve's campaign is to just make that up as he goes along. The fact of the matter is, right from day one, I have said I would gut COA. I would gut the mandates, I would gut the quotas, and I would gut the fees. I guess it was just another one of those times Steve wasn't listening, but just since you're here tonight and you can hear me, Steve, I would gut COA. That's been my position from the beginning. And no matter how many times you say something else, it just doesn't make it so.
And Bob has a follow-up. Bob.
Well, since it originated with a Supreme Court ruling, how would you deal with it if you were governor? Let's move past the Council on Affordable Housing, which apparently both of you don't like, but how would you deal with the original court decision?
The legislature has perverted the original court decision. The original court decision was to stop exclusionary zoning in towns. It was not to set up a huge Trenton bureaucracy that was going to determine where and how many units each town should have. So what the legislature under Jim McGreevey and John Corzine have done is to pervert that original decision, which wasn't a great decision to begin with anyway. And they've perverted that decision now and made it something that's much larger and much more far-reaching, and that's why you see mayors, council people opposing it.
Okay, we're going to, that's the close of that segment, Mr. Lonegan. And Mr. Christie, we're going to step away from our panel of journalist questions now to ask the two candidates a question from a viewer. And the question, unedited, comes from Joe in Trenton, and it goes, Mr. Lonegan, to yourself. If you plan on laying off any state of New Jersey employees, will you increase the uncompensated care funding to hospitals that will have to provide health care to these newly unemployed workers and their families? Mr. Lonegan.
That's an interesting question. I guess that real question, since, at the end of the day at 4 o'clock, I see most of our employees heading to Pennsylvania. Will Pennsylvania increase funding to their hospitals for the same thing? Our hospitals do a fine job. They'll continue to do a fine job. People leaving jobs in the state under me will be going into the private sector, which will be growing and prospering. New jobs will be developing and better opportunities will be opening up. So I really don't see that as being an issue.
Mr. Christie, a 30-second response.
Sure. Listen, Joe, the fact of the matter is this: tens of thousands of New Jerseyans in the private sector are losing their jobs every month. And we are in very difficult economic times, and it is simply not right and not fair to not have public employees share in that sacrifice as well. And so that's why I've said right from the beginning that I would reduce the state workforce significantly. I don't want to see anybody lose their job. All of us feel for anyone who has lost their job. The fact of the matter is, this government has overspent and overtaxed, and we need to fix it.
Mr. Lonegan, a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, I agree with what Chris said about overtaxing and having to fix it, but creating a real powerful economy based on free market principles means eliminating progressive taxation, cutting the size of government, ending small business taxes, and Chris will not join me in doing that. So we're not going to get that real kind of economic growth without that type of vision.
I have a question, a follow-up question on behalf of this question from Joe of Trenton. For you, Mr. Christie, you mentioned record unemployment levels. So what about uncompensated care for hospitals and funding that going forward in terms of increased numbers, likely because of people losing their insurance, whether it be on the public or private side?
Jim, our state is broke. Our state is on the verge of bankruptcy. We are like a third world nation right now looking for a bridge loan to pay our bills for the next 50 days. How did John Corzine and the Democrats get what used to be the most powerful economic engine in the region into this position? You can't talk about what more money we're going to spend. We need to focus on what money we're not going to spend so we can return money to the people. And what I won't join Steve in doing is I won't join him in raising taxes during a recession. That's what his plan does.
Time. Thank you. Now we're going to go back to our panel of reporters. Cynthia Burton has a question, and it goes to you, Mr. Christie. Cynthia.
Mr. Christie, since December of 2007, when the recession began, New Jersey has lost 130,000 jobs. The unemployment rate is over 8%. Could you please be specific about how you would stop the job loss in New Jersey and attract good-paying jobs?
Sure, Cynthia, I'm happy to be. First thing we need to do is to get at the wasteful, over-excessive spending that's done in Trenton. You know, 50% increase in the budget in the last 7 years, more than twice the rate of inflation. If John Corzine and Jim McGreevey had just been able to control themselves to the rate of inflation of increases over the last 7 years, we'd have $6 billion more that we could return to the taxpayers. So here's what we need to do. Cut that spending first. Second, cut income taxes across the board for everyone. As Ronald Reagan and Jack Kemp advocated for our party, we need to return to those core principles, to returning more tax dollars to everyone, not just for the privileged few or the underprivileged few, but for everyone. Third, we need to significantly cut back our business taxes. And fourth, we need to roll back the overzealous regulation that is suffocating business in New Jersey. When we do that, there'll be a sign outside New Jersey saying open for business again. That's what will happen in a Governor Christie administration.
Mr. Lonegan, a response.
You know, Chris keeps talking about Ronald Reagan. And his great quote was, do we have the courage and the will to end the discrimination and immorality of progressive taxation and return to proportionate taxation? That's the point Ronald Reagan started from. Given a Democrat Congress and what he was up against, he pushed very hard in that direction and took the best he could get. But that's the point he started from, and he did a very good job of getting us very much towards a much flatter flat tax on the federal level. Certainly, New Jersey has the most progressive and most destructive income tax in the nation, and we are seeing the loss of our friends and neighbors because of it.
Thank you, Mr. Lonegan. Mr. Christie, 30-second rebuttal.
Listen, the fact of the matter is, as much as Steve would like to say it's not so, Ronald Reagan would not support the Steve Lonegan tax plan because it raises taxes on 70% of New Jerseyans and 75% of our senior citizens while also taking away their property tax rebate in the middle of an economic recession when they're trying to struggle every day to make ends meet, when they're feeling the pain of this recession and the pain of John Corzine's failed policies. Steve wants to join them as a tax raiser. I'm going to be a conservative tax cutter. That's the difference.
Can I address that?
Not under these rules, Mr. Lonegan, which were agreed to by the campaigns. Michael has a question, and it goes, no, I'm sorry. Cynthia has a follow-up. Cynthia.
Mr. Christie, I didn't hear the answer to the attract jobs part of my question. Can you tell us what you, if elected governor, would do specifically to attract new companies to New Jersey?
Cynthia, we're going to attract new companies to New Jersey when we have lower income taxes, lower corporate taxes, and we put an end to this overreaching, overzealous, regulate everything point of view that's coming out of Trenton under John Corzine and Jim McGreevey. I've traveled around the state. I talked to a business owner who owns 2 art galleries. She has said that if this payroll tax that John Corzine is advocating goes into effect, she's going to move her 2 art galleries from Burlington County to New Hope. That's the opposite of what we want happening. When we cut taxes, we will stop that and attract new people.
Next question comes from Michael Aron, and it goes to Mr. Lonegan. Michael?
Mr. Lonegan, we sort of got to this question when we were talking about laying off state workers and charity care, but neither your website nor Mr. Christie's mentions health care in the issues section. New Jersey has about 1 million uninsured people. Do you have anything to offer them, or are you relying on the Obama administration to come up with some sort of national solution?
And one of those uninsured is my daughter, who's about 23 years old, is 23 years old, and has chosen not to have health care because it's her decision and she's healthy. So everybody without health care doesn't necessarily want to buy it. We need to deregulate the health insurance industry. We need to allow, and Chris agrees with me with this, to allow our residents to buy health insurance across state lines. And most of all, we need to bring tort reform to New Jersey to end the ridiculous malpractice lawsuits that are driving up the cost of health insurance. What we need, Mike, is real free market solutions, higher deductibles if people want them, and different alternatives to health care than the currently overregulated health insurance and health industry in the state of New Jersey.
Mr. Christie, your response.
Michael, I'm surprised at you. You didn't look at my website all that carefully because I have 4 very specific proposals on health insurance. Let me tell you about them. First is to allow out-of-state competition. If you're licensed by another state's insurance commission, you should be able to sell insurance here. Secondly, is to allow national trade organizations who offer health insurance to offer them to their members here in New Jersey. That's not allowed. We put a tax, a special tax, on individual policies and small group policies. I'd eliminate that tax. It's wrong and it discourages people from getting health insurance. And fourth, what we need to do is to make sure that everyone has access to this coverage. I'll get to the fourth one later, Michael.
Mr. Lonegan, do you have a rebuttal?
Well, I agree with every issue that Chris just mentioned, but we have to go one step further, something Chris has not mentioned: tort reform. Tort reform. Those are those trial attorneys who gouge doctors for huge malpractice claims. Insurance has driven up malpractice insurance to some of the highest in the country. So we need to bring tort reform, and I don't know, but I don't think Christie agrees with me on that issue from what I see on your website, Chris.
Michael, a follow-up question.
What is your position on tort reform?
Michael, one of the things that Steve probably doesn't know about me is that I spent the first 6 years of my legal career defending doctors in medical malpractice cases. Now, the doctors who care for me now tell me that just taught me just about enough about medicine to be completely dangerous. But we have to stop doctors from practicing defensive medicine. And so I agree with Steve. We do need tort reform, and I've been practicing defending those doctors for the first 6 years that I was a lawyer in this state, defending them in every courtroom and every courthouse in this state. I've stood by the doctors then, and I'll stand by them when I'm governor.
Bob Ingle, a question for Mr. Christie.
The next governor will have a chance to remake the state Supreme Court, nominating or renominating at least 4 of the 7 members. One up for renomination is Justice Roberto Rivera Soto, a Republican. Some think is an embarrassment to the court. What would be your decision in his case and why?
Well, first of all, let me say that I will conservatively and carefully remake a Supreme Court that has run absolutely out of control in this state and caused so many of the problems that you hear us talking about here in the debate tonight. As to Justice Soto, I have as well, and I've expressed this publicly, some deep concerns about his judgment. And some of the things that he has done while he's been on the court, whether it involved members of his family or involved some things that he's blurted out in open court that violated court orders, are things that call into question his judgment. We also need to look at what kind of justice he's been and whether he's legislated from the bench or whether or not he's been someone who's interpreted the Constitution. I think that he's got some significant problems on his hands because of his judgment. But I will remake the court, and I will remake it in this one simple principle. If you want to legislate, then run for the legislature. Don't put on a black robe and go to the Supreme Court, and there won't be any justices that I either reappoint or put on that court who will do that.
Mr. Lonegan, your response.
Well, let me be very clear. None of those 4 Supreme Court justices will be reappointed by me, in particular Roberto Rivera Soto, whose judgment has been impaired and whose decisions have been questionable to say the least. So I can be very clear on the issue that the answer is no. But furthermore, I believe justices, and I will work to see it, that justices, once appointed after 6 years, will go before the voters for attention. They will have to come before voters and put their record in front of the taxpayers and let them decide if they want these judges to stay on the bench.
Mr. Christie, a rebuttal?
Well, I won't reappoint 2 of them because 2 of them are going to retire. So I won't reappoint them, and neither will Steve because the Constitution wouldn't permit us to do that, but that's a detail. What we need to focus on is, again, having someone who has the experience and the background, as I do, to be able to analyze these folks' records, not just the ones who are on the court who may or may not be reappointed, but the ones who we're considering for appointment, and not put on our friends or our pals, but put on folks who are going to interpret the statutes and interpret the Constitution, not make law from the bench. I'll stop that as governor, and I will remake the court.
Bob, you have a follow-up.
You were a supporter of Stuart Rabner for Chief Justice. Now that you've seen him on the court for a while, are you still a supporter?
Listen, I think Stuart has a long way to go in his 7 years in order to show us what kind of Chief Justice he's going to be. But, you know, Stuart Rabner worked for me for 5 years in the United States Attorney's Office. He did an outstanding job as a prosecutor, and he now has something to prove as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I am hopeful, because I like him and I think he's a man of great integrity, that he will not be someone who will legislate from the bench. But if he does, then Stuart and I are going to have a long talk about his future.
The next question comes from Cynthia Burton, and it goes to Mr. Lonegan. Cynthia.
Mr. Lonegan, you've said that you favor preserving open space in the country's most densely populated state. Right now, the legislature is working on a $600 million bond deal to preserve open space. Do you think that's the right way to go, or would you spend money to preserve open space in a different way?
First of all, I intend to work against that bond issue that I think is going to be on the ballot. From last I heard, this is no time to be borrowing more money. And certainly in a state that after 400 years of development is only 1/3 developed, we don't need the state government to buy any more open space. We cannot afford it. We have too many politically connected people having their property, undevelopable property bought, and other possible scams like that. So I will put an end to the use of state funds to buy open space and return that to local municipalities and counties to make it their decision should they choose to do so. And going forward, what I want to see in New Jersey is homes being built again, communities being developed again, and jobs coming back to New Jersey.
Mr. Christie, your response.
Yes, thanks, Jim. I would tell you this, I agree with Steve. This is no time for us to be borrowing more money. The governor wants to take a $2 billion bridge loan out just to get us through the next 50 days, and now we're talking about even more borrowing. State debt has gone under Jim McGreevey and John Corzine from $17 billion to $38 billion. But where we do diverge is we are the most densely populated state in America, and there are appropriate uses to buy open space that otherwise might be developed in a town. I still would favor that, but I would not favor it with debt.
Mr. Lonegan, a rebuttal.
Well, Chris and I do agree that we should not be borrowing any more money. I'm glad we are going to agree on a number of things. But I think the state's use of open space money for buying property has now left the state with a whole bunch of land we bought when the market was up here, and now it's down here. So it's enough of our taxpayers taking a bath for some environmentalist idea of what's good for the state of New Jersey.
All right, and Cynthia has a follow-up. Cynthia.
Mr. Lonegan, you've criticized the Department of Environmental Protection as bad for business. How would you cut that department and yet still protect the air and the water and the land?
Cynthia, thank you for that question. It's an important one. We need to return the DEP back to its core function, which is to stop pollution and to work with businesses, not against them, not by punishing them, penalizing, and in essence, brutalizing them. The DEP has become judge, jury, and executioner over every landowner and every business owner, every farmer, and every manufacturer in the state of New Jersey. We need to end that mentality. We also need to break down the DEP. We need to take away control of our state's parks. I would actually reform a state department of parks where parks are given, and fish and game and wildlife
Michael
as well.
Aron has the next question, and it goes to Mr. Christie. Michael?
Mr. Christie, in your government reform platform, you propose ending the practice of one person holding 2 public sector jobs. What's wrong with a teacher or a police officer who's willing to serve running for town council or county freeholder?
What I said, Michael, what's specifically in the plan is no 2 public salaries. And so if that person wants to run, a policeman, a fireman, a teacher, they want to run, that's fine. Then don't accept any salary that's given at all by the public office that you run for. My position is not against 2 public positions, it's against 2 public salaries. We simply can't afford it. And we have to put an end to double dipping. That's why, as United States Attorney, I went after folks like Wayne Bryant, who had 4 and 5 government jobs, and he's going to jail this summer because I was willing to drop subpoenas on that state house when those $350 million in Christmas tree items came out, because I knew something smelled there, and we found it. We found it, and Wayne Bryant's going to jail, and now Joe Caniglio is going to jail as well. So we have to end dual office holding. The governor has not done that. It's wrong to hold 2 offices. You can't serve 2 masters. And the fact of the matter is, that's what I'll end. So if a fireman wants to run, that's fine. Just don't take 2 salaries. Just take 1 public salary. That should be enough for everybody in New Jersey.
And Mr. Lonegan, a response.
Government just starts getting bigger and bigger, the rules more complicated, and infringes on our freedom of speech. To take away the right of a teacher, fireman, firefighter, or DPW worker to be a local elected official and have to give up their tiny little stipend, whatever it may be, is just not going to do anything for the state of New Jersey. What we need to do is take away medical benefits and pensions from members of the New Jersey State Legislature. That will make a real difference for the state of New Jersey.
Mr. Christie, 30-second rebuttal.
I'm glad to see Steve has agreed with my reform plan, which would take away those medical benefits and take away any right to pensions from professional politicians, whether in the legislature or any other level of government. That's wrong. We can't afford it any longer. GM and Chrysler are going bankrupt because they can't afford these type of pensions. We can't afford it anymore, and we should not permit politicians to double dip, get pensions, get medical benefits. I was opposed to that, as I told Bob earlier in the debate. 15 years ago, when I was a Morris County freeholder, I'm just as opposed to it today.
Time. And Michael has a follow-up. Michael.
Mr. Christie, you said that Governor Corzine hasn't ended dual office holding for legislators in elected office, but he has. He signed a bill eliminating it. He just grandfathered about 15 state legislators who will slowly disappear from the scene.
Not quickly enough will they disappear from the scene, Michael. The fact of the matter is, these double-dipping friends of John Corzine, this is typical John Corzine. John Corzine does not have the strength or the will to lead and be governor. And that is a perfect example of it. He is the master of the half measure. He is the master of not standing up for principle. This legislature learned long ago you can roll John Corzine every day in the week, and they do it, and that's why we're in the hole we're in.
Time. And Bob Ingle has the next question, and it goes to Mr. Lonegan. Bob.
Given that legitimate school budget elections can be overturned by unelected bureaucrats in Trenton, is there such a thing as home rule in New Jersey anymore?
You know, Bob, home rule has been under attack for a very long time, and that's the subject of my book, Putting Taxpayers First. I'm very much a believer, as I think you know, in home rule and decentralizing the control of government and eliminating big government and getting back to local government. That's why my plan to distribute the state's income tax equally on a per pupil basis, which will cut local school taxes in every suburban town in the state by 20% of them or more, is so important. And that's why I will continue to work to give mayors and councils the tools they need to really cut taxes by taking on binding arbitration and project labor agreements. But in direct answer to your particular question, Bob, when a school budget is defeated, it should stay defeated. It should not go back to the state of New Jersey for the education bureaucrats to give the money back after the voters have spoken.
Mr. Christie, a 30-second response.
Home rule is under attack, and it's not under attack just from the things that you mentioned, Bob. It's under attack on the ceaseless mandates that are being thrown down from state government every year onto municipal governments, tying the hands of local mayors and council. I was at the reorganization meeting in my own town in Mendham Township, where they had to vote to accept project labor agreements. And they couldn't get a majority, but they knew if they didn't have a majority that they would be breaking the law. And so ultimately one of them relented, and so you had a 3-2 vote favoring it. That's not what we should be doing to local officials.
30-second rebuttal, Mr. Lonegan.
No, I agree with what Chris is saying. Project labor agreements, binding arbitration, giving back control to mayors and councils is critical. But again, distributing that state's income tax equally on a per pupil basis, which is a 20% school property tax cut, is something Chris is opposed to, because the income tax is now another income redistribution scheme within an income redistribution scheme, and what is driving the failed funding of the Abbott districts.
And that concludes the questions from our reporters panel. Thank you all. We have a final question now from one of our viewers, and it comes from Sue in Whiting. And this one will go to Mr. Christie, as the first one went to Mr. Lonegan. Mr. Christie, Sue from Whiting says first, I don't think it is a taxpayer responsibility to provide daycare. She asks, how do you feel about state-sponsored preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds, and how will the state pay for the added expense of implementing such a program?
Sue, if you're out there watching in Whiting tonight, congratulations, your question got picked. And second, I couldn't agree with you more. John Corzine's favorite word is universal. He wants universal everything, and he wants you to pay for it. And this universal pre-K is just the latest scheme. In a budget where he says we have no money, where we're going bankrupt, he's still putting money in for universal pre-K. Not only is this a wrong-headed idea, not only is this a bad expansion of government, but it's also wiping out a significant private sector element. We have a nursery school industry in this state that has been built up where people have built businesses, invested their income, invested their savings, and he is going to wipe them out with one stroke of the pen because he's decided that the government should babysit for children? It's simply wrong. And it's John Corzine's dream of an ever larger, ever growing government. That's why he won't cut employees from the state government. That's why when he tries to furlough them, they sue him, because they have no respect for him, because he has no strength and no will.
Mr. Christie. Mr. Lonegan, 30-second response.
Well, I am equally opposed to universal pre-K. I have been opposing it for quite some time and trying to campaign against it in every way possible. It's a real drain on the state's budget and another entitlement program funded by our progressive income taxes. But Chris, interestingly enough, on the radio a couple of days ago, you called for a longer school day and a longer school year. And that's going to cost taxpayers probably even more money than that. So I don't know how you justify opposing universal pre-K while calling for a longer school day and a longer school year.
Time and rebuttal from Mr. Christie.
Sure. Let me educate you, Steve, on it, because you only heard a soundbite, and I know you're very good at that, but let me give you the complete story. The complete story is that in the Abbott districts, you have charter schools right now that are providing a longer school day and a longer school year for $8,000 less per pupil than the regular Newark public schools. So I'm sorry, you're wrong on this one, Steve. We can have a longer school day and a longer school year for kids in those Abbott districts who we need to educate, and we could do it for, in Newark, for instance, for $8,000 per pupil less. So you can congratulate me later for getting better education at a lesser cost.
That is time, and we will now move to closing statements of 1 minute each, and we begin with you, Mr. Lonegan.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you've seen the difference. Mr. Christie opposes my simple flat tax. It would make us competitive with Pennsylvania, Florida, and make New Jersey an economic powerhouse again. He opposes my eliminating the corporate and small business taxes, if when eliminated, would make New Jersey a magnet state for new jobs and new businesses. He opposes my efforts to distribute the income tax equally on a per pupil basis, cutting local property taxes in suburban towns across the state of New Jersey and bringing real tax relief. Rather, he supports income redistribution schemes like rebate checks and redistributing wealth through the Abbott systems and income redistribution. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a crossroads, a time in our history when we will decide we will stand up for the values and principles on which the state has been built and this nation has been built, or we will simply be, as I said earlier, it's Me Too Republicans. Thank you for listening tonight, and I hope to have your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Lonegan. Mr. Christie.
First, I want to thank you, Jim, and Bob, and Cynthia, and Michael for your questions tonight. And I want to thank Steve for a spirited debate, and it's good to be here. I also want to thank my wife of 23 years, Mary Pat, who's with me here in the audience tonight. And for our 4 beautiful children at home, it's time for bed. So go to bed now. You've watched Dad, and it's time to go to sleep. Listen, I was born in Newark. I was raised in Livingston by a dad who put himself through college at the Breyers ice cream plant in Newark, and a mom who never could afford to go to college. They wanted me to have every dream that I could possibly have, and I want every kid who's growing up in New Jersey now to be able to live whatever dream they want. You know, as U.S. Attorney, when I became the president's nominee, people thought that we couldn't solve some of the problems that we wound up tackling, but we brought political corruption under control. We stopped child pornographers. We went against corporate crime. We need to change New Jersey. I love this state. I've lived here all my life. And if we want to change New Jersey, let's start by changing governors. I ask for your vote on June 2nd.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. And that concludes NJN's Campaign 2009 Republican gubernatorial debate. We would like to thank the 2 candidates for participating. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, immediately following this program, you can turn to NJN's digital channel and on our website for a roundtable program we're calling Scoring the Debate. Michael Aron will lead a panel that will offer impressions on this first televised debate of the primary. And of course, we'll have more on the debate here on NJN at 11 o'clock on NJN News. I'm Jim Hooker. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, gentlemen.